can fix it!
Let's be honest, nobody gets it right the first time. Sometimes a game needs to patch up a few boo-boos. These could mostly be little mistakes or goofs that could easily be missed, but your OCD will thank you if you deal with them sooner rather than later. And then there are these games. The games that don't need a band-aid, they need a freaking gauze and flex tape. Borderline unplayable across all platforms, and in most cases just a really poor launch. And yet, through trials, tribulations, and even some miracles, these seemingly doomed titles managed to overcome their issues and bring some semblance of joy back to disappointed players. Or they were at least decently patched to, say, good enough.
All fixed!
And of course, we're here to tell those games' stories. I'll be grading these titles based on how bad they were before the patches, the improvements made to the game itself, and how it improved its own reputation. Just a few ground rules, of course. We're not talking about just the empty ones. Those can mostly be functional, and a busted game is way more frustrating than one that just lacks content. We'll mostly be focusing on the game itself more than any porting issues, since being unplayable or bad on all platforms carries more weight than simply having a busted PC port. That's a concerning pattern, though. Speaking of patterns, you'll notice that a lot of our entries will be newer or more modern titles. This is mostly because back in the day, you couldn't fix buggy or bad games without having to re-release them from the ground up. So let's not waste any time. These are the top 10 fixed games.
It's a pirate's life for me. Savvy.
Sea of Thieves got a lot of hype when it was first announced. I mean, who wouldn't love a pirate's fantasy MMO where you get to sail your own ship, discover islands, and collect treasures with your friends? Wait, that's still a thing? Huh. However, this one promised No Man's Sky mixed with Subnautica, except you're not alone. What's more, our good old friends at Rare are behind this project, meaning this brand new IP under Microsoft would certainly be a return to fame for the studio if the game hits the jackpot. But if there's anything we've learned from No Man's Sky, it's that we should be very cautious when buying into hype. You see, hype is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you see it, you'll never make it through the tutorial. So, how'd the game actually do on launch? It did okay. It certainly had an interesting gameplay loop. The mechanics that were promised were there, and the player base was pretty sustainable. But one tiny flaw with the game is that it still wasn't finished. Owing to the game's scale on release, the world seemed pretty empty, and there wasn't really all that much to do other than cherry-pick missions and treasures to find. Not to mention the online functionality didn't support co-op yet, so you basically had to pray that one of the randos you were teamed up with were at all competent enough at the game. Add all that on top of a complete lack of story, empty landmarks, and clumsy combat, leading to the game feeling like a sea turtle who hatched too early out of its egg to swim in the ocean. The one remotely interesting thing about the game at the time is the giant kraken's, detached tentacles.
Well, that line in the trailer aged well.
There could be anything down there. Literally. There could be anything. We haven't finished designing it yet. Joking. That was a joke.
Despite critics ripping this game for its lackluster content, fans still really enjoyed it, and we're optimistic to see it get better, even creating some legendary moments.
Captain!
Yeah?
Still, the game cost full price at launch, so it's understandable that we would be skeptical. Fortunately, the game did get better. Nowadays, the game's content pours in more than ever, with better mechanics, a ton of story campaigns, and just a general variety of stuff to do to maintain a healthy and satisfied player base. Even our Kraken friends finally got a face to call his own. It's impressive to see how far the game has come, and thankfully it didn't face too heavy a backlash that would hamper its chance to bounce back. Does that excuse the game for being half-baked at launch? Not really, but hopefully Rare didn't repeat the same mistake. We just gotta wait and see if they can carry that experience by digging out their other buried treasures. Silent Hill was in a weird place after the fourth game. After several genre-defining survival horror games, Konami, for totally valid reasons, dismantled Team Silent and handed out the franchise to Western developers.
How did we miss the scumbag signs for so long?
Said games were undeniably different, Origins and Homecoming were seen as poor imitations of what made the original game special, unnecessary Pyramid Head cameo notwithstanding, and Shattered Memories was very obviously a different game entirely with the Silent Hill branding. It seemed at the time the West couldn't produce a true standalone Silent Hill experience. And then came Silent Hill Downpour. From the beginning, this game had quite a bit going against it. A developer who had only created one other game beforehand, a game that was quite opposite of what you'd expect from Silent Hill. Then there's the absence of longtime composer Akira Yamaoka and the same style of gameplay that people hated in Homecoming. Of course, all these issues paled in comparison to the game's technical state. Frame drops, bugs, and crashes were everywhere. As a result, the game received middling reviews at best. By the time a patch was released, people had long since given up on it. And it's unfortunate that most people never gave Downpour another chance because there was a good game in there. For one thing, the separate puzzle difficulty was finally brought back after being absent for 4 games. The combat did away with most of the elements that made it and Homecoming frustrating. In terms of the story, Downpour didn't rehash beats from previous games and actually tried to do its own thing. It's just that the developers were clearly handling something way out of their depth. Not to mention, a lot of the annoying trends of modern gaming and Western game development were creeping into the project. This did come out during a time when every game was trying to copy Call of Duty after all. It's low on the list because while it was fixed, it's still not that amazing of a game. Most importantly, it still lacks the strong fear factor of the originals.
Though, I mean, it's cold comfort, but it's better than the pachinko games.
I have no mouth, and I must scream.
A broken game from a broken company. Happy birthday to me!
Ah yes, the fair EA Games, the king of disappointments, the duke of paywall privileges, the sultan of shady business deals, the creme de la creme of scum!
Okay, come on. You talk about EA this much and still make it interesting. And am I wrong about them? And is it anywhere more evidence than the oh-so-delightful roller coaster that was Star Wars Battlefront II? The original Battlefront game by Pandemic Studios from 2004 was really well received. Sure, it had its hiccups with the lackluster single-player mode and poor AI, but it made up for it with multiplayer and just how it managed to bring the world of Star Wars to life. And only 1 year later, its sequel managed to fix the original's problems and wrap it up nicely with a storyline. So yay, we gotta see a sequel be just as good and even improve from the original. Happily ever after, right?
There's no such thing as happily ever after.
Well, I wish that's how the story ends, but years later, EA and DICE rebooted the franchise. And the first one was not too bad, actually. Sure, it didn't have a great launch and sorely lacked content for the single-player mode, but it still had great gameplay, visuals, music. It had some good bones. 2017's Battlefront II was doomed from the start. Even before its launch, the game was heavily panned by testers. And based on EA's history, go on, guess.
Hey kids, what do you think screwed Battlefront 2 over? Honestly, it sounds like it would have made it better.
Yeah, they tried to sneak microtransactions into a Star Wars game. They hid about 80 to 90% of their titles' most notable content behind a paywall, on top of a few issues, again with the single player. Seriously, what does EA have against playing by yourself? Anyways, for a while, Battlefront 2 became the poster boy for bad microtransactions, catching a lot of well-deserved flack for basically forcing players to pay out their noses to get any enjoyment. It got so bad that eventually EA had to cave. In 2018, DICE removed the microtransactions and regulated the loot boxes to occasional in-game currency and cosmetics. After that, EA released plenty of content for free before ending their support for the game in 2020. Wow, that kind of feels a little sudden, but who cares? Battlefront 2 feels whole and playable again. And then it broke. Again.
Oh, just tell me when it's over.
Around October 2021, some oh-so-lovable cheaters and hackers decided it'd be fun to ruin the game for casual players by causing a glitch where you couldn't die. You could have 1 HP left, and yet it never goes down. And of course, you can't rely on EA to fix a game they stopped supporting. Well, then again, you can't really rely on them to do anything but disappoint. Of course, they turned a blind eye and shot down cries for help from anyone who just wanted to enjoy the game. So it looked like the end of the road for Battlefront.
Or was it?
Yeah, it died, but it lived. Sort of. In early 2022, DICE stepped up and patched the game again. Okay, so for now, fans can enjoy a fairly decent Star Wars game. I'm saying for now because I don't really trust the peace to last for long with EA involved. Still, it's at least nice to know that someone there cares even a little.
Only for now.
So, how about that Assassin's Creed Unity, eh? I mean, I've heard of thin skin, but not no skin.
As you can see, Assassin's Creed Unity was ripe for ridicule when it first came out, and people loved to tear it to shreds. But why? Fans were excited to see another continuation after the enormous success of Black Flag, so what changed? Was it Ubisoft playing loosey-goosey with their portrayal of the French Revolution that kind of spat in the eyes of the revolutionaries? Or was it their totally not BS reason for why they couldn't have female assassins in multiplayer mode? Wow, the red flags were already there and we slept on them. Okay, it was both those reasons, but the biggest reason for all this heckling was the embarrassing glitches littered throughout the game from the very start. Character models glitching wildly, suddenly dropping through the floor, textures not loading properly or not even at all, and a serious dip in frame rate. And that's merely the tip of the iceberg of mediocrity. Sure, they tried to pass off the drop in frame rate as a way of making it more cinematic. Gee, I wonder if anyone believed that.
How about no?
Yeah, I didn't think so. Instead, everyone gleefully and rightfully roasted Unity left and right for being incredibly unplayable. To be fair on their part, Ubisoft did issue an apology and offer players a free story expansion. Not that that really makes up for such a busted game.
But hey, you know what? Unity got fixed? Me neither.
Yeah, believe it or not, the game was fixed almost a year later. Ubisoft released a big patch that managed to fix over 300 bugs, thus making Unity, dare I say, playable again. And since that day, Unity has actually become a pretty fun game with gorgeous scenery and really nice characterization, customization, and visuals, ones that are actually functional. Of course, that doesn't fix the ethical problems I mentioned earlier, but it's at least a step in the right direction. Unfortunately for Unity, the internet does not forget its problems. And unfortunately for Ubisoft, we won't let them forget theirs.
So, you want to know a trick to make every single JRPG fan groan? Who wants to hear about poor localizations?
To be fair, there are plenty of stories of games coming to the West with poor scripts, bad voice acting, or a bunch of typos. Usually we just call it Arc Rise Fantasia. Ayo! But what happens when a localization is so bad that the publisher had to go back and redo the whole thing from scratch due to a backlash from not only the players, but also the original developer? Well, you'd be NIS America, and the game would be Ys 8 Lacrimosa of Dana. A little backstory on this, as it is a doozy. Neon Falcom, the developer behind Ys and its sister series Trails, has a long history of localization mishaps that could be a rant on its own. They've had a long list of publishing partners over the years for each of their games, including big names like Namco Bandai, Atlas, Konami, and Xseed Games. Speaking of Xseed, they were one of the longest running partners and considered to have the best localization scripts by most Falcom fans. Well, in 2016, it was announced that NIS America would take over as Falcom's main Western partner after a bidding war for it. And the first game they would localize would be Ys 8. So how did that go?
That's no good.
The core localization script was fine, if you discount poor translations, a bunch of spelling and grammar issues, and odd phrasing choices. For example, take a look at this dungeon name, originally called Crevice of the Archaeozoic Age. This is a big dungeon that acts as a major story shift with a battle of one of the game's main antagonists. How did Nisa localize it? Archaeozoic Big Hole. used Google Translate and went from there. And while that is funny, what isn't is the fact that they mistranslated food items, which players use to buff their characters with extra stats and essential stuff like EXP and SP boosts. I'm honestly surprised it didn't rename some of them Jelly Donuts. Big hole. So after a letter campaign from fans and pressure from Falcom, Nisa redid the entire localization from the ground up. The company president even made a public apology for the debacle, saying they will use a new translator and editor and even redo all of the voice acting too. So 8 months later, we got the updated script, and it was good. Probably not the same quality of an Exceed or Atlas script, but still much better than before. You'd think this is where it ends, right? Well, no. You see, while all this was happening, NS America also delayed the PC version of the game because of optimization issues. So when the updated script was done, they also released the PC port. Guess how that turned out?
That's no...
Despite the delay, the PC port was filled with bugs, still had poor optimization issues, and crashed frequently. Several more patches came out over the year, and they weren't able to fix all of the issues either. It took 2 more years, and grabbing Durante, the Riz who fixed the original Dark Souls port, to fully fix it. Not only did he fix it, but he also added in co-op, which wasn't even in the original Japanese version. Dude's a freaking legend. All right, this has been going on long enough. So nowadays, Ys 8 is fully playable and still exists as one of the best action JRPGs out there. NS America did continue localizing Falcom games with much better results, though with their own hiccups, which we won't go into here.
What a hoot! If only you knew!
We're almost done, you know, so we're where we need to be for release.
Oh, one more time!
We're almost done, you know, so we're where we need to be for release.
Oh, good old Todd Howard. You know, we really should be thanking him. He has inspired some of the best memes and inspired one of the best fan songs in the business. And all because of the royal crap show that was Fallout 76. Already you're probably asking, but wait, how can we be at Fallout 76 already? Well, that's the miracle about 76. It's so intense that it skips over the other 73. If intense is another way of saying the buggiest Fallout game ever. For context, Fallout 76 was supposed to be the company's biggest game ever. 16 times the detail, 4 times bigger than Fallout 4, and the franchise's first glorious step into the online multiplayer world.
Why am I suddenly terrified beyond belief?
Probably because it delivered none of that. No, wait, that's not really fair. It barely delivered any of it. It was a big game, a big empty game with no NPCs in sight, and it did have 16 times the detail of hot garbage. Then of course there's the cursed power armor, server and game crashes, frame rate drops, spontaneous T-posing. Need I say more? Actually, yes, there's also the problem with it being perpetually online, meaning that the ever-growing list of problems was only gonna get longer. Not even mods could fix it. And so how did Bethesda originally respond to so much criticism?
I'm smart, you're dumb. I'm big, you're little. I'm right, you're wrong. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Apparently the game was perfectly fine and we didn't appreciate it better. Or maybe the game was rushed, Bethesda knew this and pushed for a release anyway. Nah, that couldn't be. What kind of nutcase would release a game knowing all the bugs were there?
It just works. It just works.
Oh yeah, that kind. So long story short, Fallout 76 became infamous for its horrific launch. But I'm happy to say that the story does have a happy ending. Slowly but surely, the game was patched with each new update. The online and balancing issues were resolved, and some mechanics were overhauled. And the most cherished update of all, actual human NPCs.
The fact that people rejoiced so much over just having NPCs really says something.
Of course, not every patch is going to be a winner. Every now and then what should be a step forward takes 2 steps back. But it's safe to say that Fallout 76 is in a much better state than it was at launch. And while there are definitely better games out there, it's still a fun experience with plenty to offer. Unfortunately, the damage from the launch is already done, and Todd Howard will be forever remembered as the clown of the gaming industry. Okay, one of the clowns. And you know what? Maybe I'm being too harsh. I mean, he is a bit of a clown, but compared to those others, he's not really as bad of a clown.
Hey! Who put that I did not approve that! I am a joker, not a clown! Get it right! Remember when I could earnestly praise Blizzard? Those are good days.
Is there any plans to make this playable on PC?
We don't have any plans at the moment to do PC. Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
So, turn your mind back to the early 2010s. Blizzard is the undisputed king of the PC games market. World of Warcraft is the MMO. StarCraft 2 was released to critical acclaim. All eyes were on their next release, the long-awaited Diablo 3. Nearly 12 years after 2, the third entry would finally be in our hands. Then it actually came out, and, well, look at the title of this video. Right off the bat, things are already shaky given that the game was online only. This had many people worried that the game would be unplayable at launch due to server issues. And lo and behold, they were completely right. Even if you could actually play Diablo 3, there was still the matter of the game itself. There were bugs out the wazoo and the balance was all over the place. Most egregiously, the loot was incredibly stingy. This was kind of a big deal since the whole point of games like Diablo is to get super OP by decking out your character. This fun little mechanic was to incentivize usage of the in-game auction house, which used real money. So with that in mind, the big order of the day was to completely remove said auction house and make loot far more useful. But what really saved Diablo 3 was the Reaper of Souls expansion. In particular, the new adventure mode allowed you to explore and grind while completely ignoring the story. This gave you far more freedom. You weren't just replaying the same acts at increasing difficulty anymore. Add a ton of new features on top of that and you have yourself a winner. While there's unfortunately never a new expansion after Rise of the Necromancer, there's still regular updates added through the seasonal changes.
And everything was lovely once again. Wonderful.
You guys remember when CD Projekt Red was the problem child of the gaming industry?
Yeah, after the deluge of BS we got over the last year or so, it was easy to forget the absolute insanity that occurred with CD Projekt and their last hit, Cyberpunk 2077. I went into way more detail on the backlash of the game over the 2021 fails. As for what actually happened with the game, well, after reaching peak Western open world RPG status with Witcher 3, CD Projekt was riding high and it didn't seem like anything could knock them down. After many years of waiting, they finally gave additional info on their next hit game and even announced that Matrix and John Wick star Keanu Reeves was going to be in a major role. Don't stop them now, they're having a good time, they're on a roll. Yeah, well, as any jerk whose whole life means to quote the story of Icarus to anyone that will hear will tell you, they flew too close to the sun. With almost 8 years since its announcement and it getting delayed so many times in a short time span that it became the new meme for delayed games, we finally got the game in late 2020. And we probably should have waited until 2077 to get it, because it was bad. Bad UI, weird camera angles, the usual glitches and crashes, a poor story, barely any end game, quest progression issues, making Keanu's character even more of a jerk than Neo in the Matrix sequels. The list just goes on and on. CD Projekt overworked their staff. There is some debate on whether or not it was consensual. They restarted development twice. It was the same crap you've heard a million times from every other game that went through development hell. Sony delisted the game and lightened the refund policy for Cyberpunk specifically, and CD Projekt got sued up the wazoo. But this is a list for fixed games, so I can assume you know what happens. Yep, they got their crap together. Over the next 2 years, CD Projekt took their time and did what they could to fix Cyberpunk 2077 into a product they could be proud of. Bug patches with notes pages long were released every few months, and they settled the lawsuits too. This past February, the next-gen console versions were finally released, and CD Projekt announced that the game was fixed. Honestly, from what I hear, it was. Again, it still doesn't reach the levels of masterclasses like Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, and of course, Witcher 3, but it is now a functioning game with decent shooting mechanics and an open world with a somewhat middling story, to be fair. Honestly, other games were fixed better, but the fact that CD actually learned their lesson somewhat, went back and fixed their game while also giving their employees the time to do it is something I can't really say about a lot of other companies. Now, things shouldn't have gotten to this point to begin with, but at this point, there are worse situations to be had. Now, so far, there isn't any news about future Cyberpunk or CD Projekt content, so we don't know if they truly learned their lesson. It remains to be seen. See, there were hyped games, and there was No Man's Sky. For years, you could not go anywhere without hearing about this game. It was pervasive. And by pervasive, I include late night TV. First announced in 2014, No Man's Sky was poised to be the greatest game of all time. An unprecedented, massive game on a scale unseen by humanity. This was gonna be
out of this world.
Then, shortly before the release, the cracks began to form. For starters, the game was leaked, and the version that people got their hands on was already far less impressive than the trailers. Then it actually came out. To make a very, very long story short, what we got was the kids' bop version of what was promised. The amount of missing features could fill a video by themselves, to say nothing of the absolutely abysmal technical state of the game. Most egregiously, the hyped up multiplayer component was completely absent. Even if you were able to look past all that, the game largely consisted of just busy work on an overly large world. As a result, the fan base went nuclear.
Liar! Liar! Liar!
People were so outraged that there was an investigation for false advertising. Even the CEO of Sony criticized them. And in response to all of this, nothing. Sean Murray and the others had nothing to say in response to the outrage. And for a time, it seemed like that was the end of the story. No Man's Sky was just going to end up as another example of games promising more than they could deliver, then buzzing off.
This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper.
Behind the scenes, though, things told a different story. In regards to the claim that Murray just lied about everything, there was a lot of stuff that wasn't in his control. To summarize, No Man's Sky's status as an indie game being propped up by Sony meant that the massive amount of hype was affecting the team as well. Murray was not the kind of guy who can handle this. The fact that so much was riding on it meant that he and the others couldn't delay it any further. As it turns out, post-launch, Hello Games was quietly working on fixing and improving No Man's Sky. Well, why didn't they tell us? Pattern recognition. They knew that no amount of just telling us we're working on it would ever satiate audiences. Actions speak louder than words after all. And take action, they did. They pushed out update after update, even though there was no guarantee they would win back the crowd. And little by little, people began to warm up to it, with Next alone being over 8 gigs. Keep in mind, this game still sold like gangbusters upon release. They could have just left No Man's Sky as it was and completely disappeared from the public eye. The best part about all this is that all of these improvements were done for free. In the end, No Man's Sky went from the poster child of overhyped messes to one of the biggest success stories in winning back audience appreciation. One of, but not the biggest.
Gee, I wonder what that could be. It's not like there's a certain mega popular MMO you've avoided talking about this whole video.
It's obvious because it's right.
Kirby Star Allies. Nintendo's had too much of a fix-it-later practice, but this one actually feels genuine. For Kirby's sake, let's hope it stays that way. Xenoblade 2, more of adding much-needed quality of life features rather than a massive overhaul. Dynasty Warriors 9, they couldn't fix everything, but at least it's not painful anymore. Dark Souls PC, they took their sweet time to fix it, only after modders fixed it for them. Kingdom Hearts 3, oh hey, some actual freaking post-game. Daikatana, hey, they fixed it. over a decade later. A lot of people would say that you never have a second chance to make a good first impression. But what if you faked your death, hit the gym, dyed your hair, changed your name, and then came back a year later? Would the new you get a new first impression? Probably, because that's what happened with Final Fantasy XIV. I'm sure I don't need to tell you fine people of the internet that Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was a less than stellar game. Bugs, server issues, incomprehensible design choices in the game's systems, and potted plants that have more polygons than the player character models. For a lot of games, this alone would have been a death sentence. For an MMO, which are notoriously a massive investment in terms of time and money and costs a further small fortune to keep running, it is mind-boggling that Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was up for 2 years. Better MMOs have been canned in half the time. But the miracles for 14 didn't stop there, for along came a man, no, a god by the name of Yoshi P. He presented a plan, one that many would call mad. Yet, what did Square have to lose? They were already bleeding money from this failed MMO, so they decided to blow it up, figuratively and very literally. Yoshi P's lunatic idea was to rebuild the game from the ground up. But not only that, but to include the players in the rebuilding process. The destruction of the 1.014 would become part of the game's lore. The Battle of Cartano and the summoning of Bahamut that would result from that battle would all but destroy the world, and what remained would go on to be rebuilt for Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. The rest, as they say, is history. A Realm Reborn was a success, and I hardly need to mention how wildly successful 14 is these days. They had to postpone selling more copies of the game for the release of Endwalker until they could build new servers to house all the new players. There are plenty of videos going into much more detail about Yoshi P's crusade to save this game, and I highly encourage you to go find them. None specifically that I can think of. They say from small acorns, mighty oaks grow, and Yoshi P has sure helped to cultivate one mighty oak.
I'm Josh Scorcher, and...
Cut!
Hey everyone, this is Josh. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Please check out my other social media like my Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr. Check out my other channels such as Joshua Burner for reactions and other stuff, Dragon Fighter Gaming for tabletop, and Bob Equestria for cartoons. Consider checking below the video and donating to my Patreon, Streamlabs for my merchandise, or becoming a YouTube member. Thanks for watching.